Uber Lilith has been quite the challenge. I started trying to defeat her about 3 weeks ago, which is around the 11th of June if I recall correctly, and I think that her buff was on the 8th of June, right? So I had already seen some other content creators take her on, and it didn't seem all that hard in terms of survivability, or at least I didn't expect to have one-shot mechanics, but to my surprise, yeah, she hit insanely hard, and I would usually just die to one of her mechanics. So I decided to tweak my build a little bit using the same build that I had in the beta, thinking that that was the build that was going to defeat her. It did a little bit better a couple days after, but that still wasn't quite enough. I had the same issue. I kept dying to her one-shot mechanics, so I thought, okay, we're gonna have to switch it up. I therefore looked on YouTube, basically, found some other content creators, which I will mention in the description, and noticed a couple of things. For example, Shoutout just has to go. It wasn't quite doing the damage that it's supposed to, so instead we wanted to just really focus on our own damage, and attack speed was king. It is literally all about attack speed and loading the poison imbuement on the boss, and by then I had probably attempted this like, I don't know, 100 times, 200 times. I stopped counting, to be honest, and I was getting pretty good at dodging the mechanics, but still it wasn't quite enough because I would always fail at some point on specifically those mechanics. I made it to the second round a couple of times, but there as well, I would usually just die to one of those mechanics. So fast forward to a week later, after which another content creator gave us an important clue to the puzzle, which was the stagger mechanic. At first, I didn't think it was possible to stagger the boss fast enough during the first phase to skip the mechanics entirely, but it is doable. On the run that you're seeing right now is the first run where I killed her. I didn't quite exactly pull off the perfect run, so I eventually tweaked my gear and built a little bit to eventually pull it off, but at least this is the run where I got my achievement. So it goes to show that even without mobility, which I sacrificed entirely on my build, I was still able to deal basically with the ads and the mechanics themselves to survive and obviously make it to the next round and kill her, right? So what is important to understand here is that your stagger comes from obviously very key pieces of gear. For example, the Fist of Fates. I've tried the other gloves, the Frostburns, for example. That wasn't quite enough. So I tried a bunch of different little tweaks to the stagger mechanic, and eventually kind of just settled with the build that I'll present you guys today, which includes, like I said, the Fist of Fate, right? For the second phase, it's the same concept. You need to stagger the boss fast enough to skip the mechanics entirely, which is done fairly easily with the exact same build. In fact, it's easier to stagger her in the second phase than it is in the first phase, and then all you need to really do is to dodge the parts where the ground is breaking, basically, right? So that's it. So that's all you really have to deal with. So whether that's a mechanic or not, I guess is besides the point, but basically you're skipping everything. Now, is this a legit kill? Is this exploiting? To be honest, I'm not sure. I don't think that this is necessarily working as intended. I believe that with time they may change the way that the stagger works on bosses, so take advantage of this, I guess, in the meantime, if you want to get your achievement. But it still requires some pretty insane gear to pull this off, right? So you still need a very crazy amount of DPS and basically no survivability. So I guess in a sense, it comes with the achievement of reaching that point, which is not exactly easy. But at the same time, it kind of looks like, you know, you're not really doing the actual fight. You're just getting around all the mechanics by playing around with the exploit, if we were to call it that. So anyway, there you have it. Now, all that said, let's jump into the gear and the skills. And I will obviously have a link to the build in the description for you guys, but I still want to go over a couple of important points. Okay, so puncture has not changed, same thing. You definitely want improved twisting blades for the dazed. Only 1 point in siphoning strikes is needed to survive. You definitely want a point into methodical shadow step for the stun for even more stagger. And then on my perfect run, you will notice that I use the smoke grenade along with these two passives, including countering smoke grenade. I thought that this would get the grenade to come back more often, but after looking at the footage, it doesn't look like it's really doing anything. In fact, I'm not even entirely sure if this is contributing a lot to the stagger bar. So between this and the cold imbuement, it might be just fine with one or the other. So maybe it was just all RNG for me to hit that perfect point between DPS and stagger. As for the rest of the points, definitely want one in this passive right here. I do have +3 to exploit. And then I do have an extra +3 to poison imbuement as well. So we have a maxed out poison imbuement with these two passives. Definitely want deadly venom. And then for our energy regeneration, we are using combo points. And so we are relying on a lot of these passives right here to help us generate more energy with our lucky hits. And then even more crit rate with these two passives. And finally, the reworked close quarters combat passive, which now deals more damage to crowd controlled enemies, which I believe is working when she is staggered, if I understand correctly, but also giving us a lot more attack speed. Then for the gear and the stats, you will notice that I have a pretty high amount of strength and intelligence and fairly low dexterity, and we achieve this by putting some all stats onto our weapon and some extra intelligence and strength onto our gear. And this is simple. We just want to maximize our Paragon board, so the benefits into our last board. So this is how I found, or I was able to achieve it basically. So it might not be needed. You might have enough DPS otherwise, but this is how it worked for me. So let me go over each of the pieces real quick. We have intelligence cooldown, a reduction and poison imbuement on the helm, which I think is a must. And then we have the Mangler's aspect for the daze effect for our stagger mechanic. Then on the chest piece, more stagger mechanic with the noxious ice aspect, and then fully offensive rolls for the all the stats basically. So 0 survivability on that one. Then we have the Fist of Fate, a 260% roll. A few things to point out here is the generation of primary resource on lucky hit. We have the immobilize on lucky hit, and we have the daze on lucky hit, which all seem to contribute to even more stagger. So even though this is daze and this is daze and our twisting blades is daze, basically they all seem to be needed to load up that bar even faster. As for the pants, I went with the disobedience. This is where I decided to put them. I did try with other aspects, for example Umbrus, and I found that that wasn't enough. I need to stack more armor because I have fairly low armor for this build, and this gives me just enough to survive her regular hits, but not the one-shot mechanics. Then we have the Penitent Boots for chill effect, which is more stagger, obviously, right? And which is going to, I believe, also help us when we get to the freeze mechanic, which I believe counts for more DPS when they are staggered, but don't quote me on that. Then for the weapon, we have all stats, core skill, and damage to close enemies. You will notice that there's only 3 rolls here. This is because it is the unique crossbow that you can farm from one of the bosses, the world boss, right? Or mini boss, unique boss, whatever they're called. And basically it looks like this. So here's another one. Here's an interesting tip for you guys. When you enchant these, it costs almost absolutely nothing to enchant these, right? And if you keep re-rolling it to something you want, for example Dex, if that's what you're going for, your next enchants will basically cost nothing. So the reason I took this crossbow is because I could not get all stats to roll on my main crossbow. So I just wanted the all stats to maximize my Paragon board, so I worked with this one. Okay, so that is one way to do it, but obviously I would like to use the better one that has 4 stats on it. So hopefully in the future I'll get that. Okay, but then for this one, this is where we're putting our imbuement aspect for 80% extra damage, and I think this was another key to the puzzle. I think we all assumed that Twisting Blades was better here and that this was better on a weapon or on your amulet, for example, but Twisting Blades is just fine on your weapon, and you definitely want the imbuement one on your 2-hand weapon. Okay, then for the amulet, this was another hard piece to obtain and still not perfect. I have +3 ranks to exploit. I think weapon mastery might be a little bit better. 3 ranks to all imbuement, really good. Energy cost reduction is certainly helping, and then imbuement skill damage. Okay, so rolling this piece and this piece is probably what was the longest to obtain, basically, right? So I had a couple of the pieces that were almost perfect, but never 4 of the good rolls, and then I finally got that in the past couple of days. We have the attack speed on our amulet for an extra 38%, and then our 2 rings are basically the same. We have lucky hit crit chance, crit damage, vulnerable damage on both of them. And then we have on this one, and this is another really important piece of the puzzle, I was using the one where you deal more damage when you stand still, and that is not enough. You want to gain the extra 40% of crowd control, which I believe will increase the amount of stagger that you have on the boss. Okay, so forget about the little extra damage. In a sense, you are getting some because you have 20% increased crit chance when they are injured. Instead, you want that 40% of increased crowd control duration. And then we have the poison imbued skills that leave the toxic pool, which allows you to spam your poison imbuement on the other ring. And finally, for the two weapons, one of them is Twisted Blades. So here anything works, basically dex, vulnerable, crit damage, damage to poison enemies, damage to close enemies, imbued skill damage, those would all work. And we have our unique Ashera's Conjar for the increased attack speed. As for the specialization, we are now using the combo points for even more damage, and we are also buffing ourselves with a potion of increased attack speed. So I've tried crit rate, crit damage, lucky hit increase. At some point I was trying the increased armor to try and survive more, but overall, if you're going for the high DPS build, you definitely want to have the increased attack speed. And finally, the Paragon board, which you guys are probably familiar with by now because I have the same 4 first boards, well, the starter board, and then 3 of my boards are kind of like my core boards, which I always work with. I do shuffle some of the points around for survivability or DPS depending on what I'm trying to do, but only the last 2 have been changing for my last couple of builds that I've showcased. So if I'm doing a DPS build, it looks like this, and if I'm doing a Nightmare push build, then it is going to be kind of like this, but the last 2 boards will change. In fact, I think I may be able to work with only changing 1 board. So I will try to present that in a separate video though, okay? So for the glyphs, it is pretty much standard at this point. We are using Closer in the starter board. Then we have Combat in the Exploit. After that, we have Efficacy in the Deadly Ambush. Then we've got our Turf into the Cunning Stratagem. After that, in the Eldritch Bounty, we've got the Bane, and in the last one, we've got the Tracker, which is Tricks of the Trade, okay? And now here's where the stats of our gear are coming into play. It is to hit the secondary bonuses of these nodes, right? So it's not easy to achieve. And then for my Nightmare push builds, I'm also even using these nodes up here. So I need 630 intelligence and 610 strength. So it is not easy to achieve those stats, but I think they do make a difference. So again, you don't have to do this. I'm pretty sure there are plenty of boards that will work for DPS purposes, but this is what I decided to use. Another thing to point out, obviously, because we are using poison imbuement, we are focusing a lot on the Eldritch board for this build, okay? So we definitely want to have this node up here and the one all the way down here, including the legendary node right there. The one in the middle obviously also helps quite a bit. And then for these ones right here, they're fairly similar, but I do sometimes just switch up a glyph and then move a couple points around, and it still works whether you're doing strength or intelligence, okay? But again, the link to the build will be in the description, so hopefully you guys have enjoyed this build video. Do let me know what you think in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.